Hello, I'm Dave McCormick, Product Manager and VP of Product Management here at Alpha Software. I'm pleased to present today's webcast, our Q&A weekly webinar webcast, along with Dion McCormick, no relation, who is our lead solutions engineer here at Alpha. Today, Dion is going to be going over some cool stuff. I believe it has to do with using Alpha with repositories, and I think specifically Git, but we'll get into that. But this is also a questions-driven session, so please take some time and type your questions into the chat window of the WebEx interface, and we'll get started. So let me go ahead and make you the presenter here, Dion. And there it is. Fantastic.
And all this cool stuff here. So neat. Like, in fact, I'm going to go, that's me. Oh, that's me. That's me. I'm learning all the new cool tools.
There are a million tricks.
Like
also,
I can highlight my
show
face.
People how to, yeah, exactly.
Well, maybe that's not what I want to do.
You don't want to do that. Just a mustache or something, yeah.
Like that. Okay. Oh, I can move that out of the way. No, thank you, everybody. Hey, welcome. We're working new, as always, new technology, fun, adventuresome at all time until you crash into the side of a mountain. So we're test pilots. We're WebEx test pilots. Anyway, thank you, everybody, for joining us. We really appreciate you taking the time out of your very, very busy schedule to join us. And also, we appreciate your patience as we work out all the little fine kinks of the new webinar setup. But we're committed, and we appreciate your presence. In terms of our work this week, again, you'll notice that there's a chat window. If you don't mind taking the time to enter any questions you might have in your chat window, and that way we'll monitor that. We're working on ways to improve that. But go ahead and do that, and that will allow us to keep an eye and queue up those questions, both on the topic today, but other topics that you may have an interest in. Now, along with that, I just want to give you a heads up that we're working heavily on our year plan. Obviously, as we've talked about before, the year of the Web API, I'll actually be on site at Alpha next week, working with the team on our plans for the year, both our training and our webinars and all the really fun stuff we have planned, along with a lot of Transform content that will be coming down the road and getting prepared for that. But as always, we recommend that if you do have questions, you don't have to wait to jump on with us at this on this webinar. You can always just reach out at guides, that's GUIDES, at alphasoftware.com. And if you jump on there and send that email out, we queue it up, and we use it to prepare content and also be prepared for these kind of meetings. So again, you don't have to wait to ask that question. You can have it ready to go for our next meeting, on the webinar contact. So as Dave mentioned, I've got a little more of a deeper dive today. A few weeks back, we did a series on DevOps and the idea of what DevOps and why it's important. And we talked about setting up your process, source control, monitoring. And when we did the source control presentation, it was very well received. There was a huge amount of impact and questions, and people were really very interested in that capability. So today we're going to do a little bit more of a deep dive to be able to show you a little bit more about how to set it up, how to put it together, how to add a new project into source code, and then talk a little bit about some of the nuances to do that. So what I'd like to do first is just a couple quick little slides. I'm not going to bore you to death, hopefully, and then we'll go right into a demonstration of how we set these things up for one-to-one. DevOps source control is critical. We're all very busy people. We get pulled 1,000 different directions, and a big part of developer operations or DevOps is consistency in process. And if you can't do it yourself, there's a ton of tools that help you do that. So for instance, if you're doing things like issue tracking, emails are okay, but you're going to be far more efficient if you use something like Jira or Assembly or Manifest or any of these number of ticket management systems and agile kind of process. So tools help you bring repeatability, consistency, control to your work. And one of the key aspects of that is source control and the ability for you to manage source control. Now, as an individual developer and using Alpha, you have some built-in tools like the backup capability and the restore capability within Alpha. But the issue is what happens when it's not just you? And as we see, the world is going to bigger projects with Alpha, more extensive projects, more than one person involved with the project. The moment you have more than one person, you really are looking at source control, because otherwise you're going to be, instead of automating the systems and having them in place, you're going to have to do it manually, and that can cause disruption. And one error or one screw up can be, painful, and both to your client and also to yourself, and a waste of time and all those pieces here. So source control is a key element of an overall developer operations strategy. And what we're going to do is talk a little bit more about today. And again, it seems a little scary at times, but it's really not bad. And all the tools have matured so well, it's really good. And this is a little comic strip I found a while back, which you may have used this same excuse in terms of being a open source advocate, but it's really learning bits and pieces. And part of the problem with source control was that especially for Git and stuff, it was a command line interface, fairly arcane, but now with tools it's become a lot easier to do that. Now source control has some really, really key things. One is that we are going to be demonstrating today Git and a distributed source control setup, meaning that there's a central repository, and then you have a repository on your local machine, and you could have multiple other ones out there. And through that, you coordinate source files between different individuals, different people that are using that. And so the idea is you have a primary repository, and then each person that's connecting in there has their own repository, and then there's coordination between there. And the nice thing is that the tools that I'm going to show you today make this very easy to manage and very easy to handle from that standpoint. And, there's all the ones, but we're going to be focusing on Git today. That's one of the most popular out there. And there's a number of different vendors like GitHub, Bitbucket, GitLab, Codeplex, Google Code. We're going to be, again, focusing on Git and GitHub because I've got all that set up and ready to go. And, there are other ones like CVS and SVN. They all kind of work the same these days. So what we cover today should be easy to extend your knowledge to those pieces there. Now, very important is we're going to be showing today SourceTree, which is from Atlassian. It's a free product, which is a graphical user interface on top of source control. And that makes life a lot easier than learning command lines. But do realize there's other ones, and you don't have to use SourceTree. There's Tower on the Mac, SmartGit, GitKraken. You look out, there's tons. Some are free, some are paid. But I found SourceTree is a really good solution, and again, it is free, and so if you want to dip your toes in, it's something very easy to use from that standpoint here. So very important is that Alpha has done a lot of work to make source control very friendly, and you're going to see that in a little bit. It's going to be very fun. But one is that we're a file-based system, so when you're actually working on things, even if they're components and stuff, they're being saved as files to your system, and thus can be managed within that. We've made a lot of changes under the cover in terms of how file naming, versioning, timestamps, things like that, so version control handles it a little bit cleaner. And again, one of our plans is to include some version control functionality within the Alpha Anywhere ID, so you don't have to use a third-party tool, but that's still on the roadmap, no committed delivery yet, but we're definitely looking on that from there. So with that, I'm going to do a demonstration, and today's demonstration is the following. I'm going to set up a central repository. I'm going to create a local repository of that. I'm going to create a new project on Alpha, and then I'm going to show you a little bit of how you go through the process of updating, editing, and things like that. Plus, I'm going to also talk a bit about what's called Git Ignore in the Git world, which allows you to ignore the specific files and directories that don't make sense. And it'll make when you see it, it'll make more sense than me describing it right now. So with that in mind, I'm going to go ahead and jump over into my development environment. But before I do it, I want to make sure, do a process check, Dave, that everything's coming through, everything's working. And
okay.
Awesome. And again, as I go through this, if you have any questions, put them into that chat window, and Dave will be monitoring that and have that available to go from there. So with that in mind, I'm going to go ahead and go into my development environment. So I am currently in what's called, excuse me, this is SourceTree. It's a downloadable desktop software, and I've got my repositories here, and I'll walk through this in a few minutes. But I'm going to go ahead and open up my web browser here. And let me go ahead and go in here and go to GitHub. And I'm going to go ahead and log into GitHub real quick. Oh, I'm already logged in. So I've got in GitHub, let's see if I got my profiles here. So I've got some different ones. They're mainly around helping Alpha on different projects and things like that. But what I'm going to do is my first step is I have an account with GitHub. So if you don't have an account with it, there's GitHub, GitLab. They're all they are very similar in capabilities there. And also what's nice is almost all of them offer a free account. And this is going to be, if I jump back here, the GitHub is going to be my central repository right here, or my repository right here. So the idea behind that is that this is going to be my primary up in the cloud where all my files are going to go. And I will create a local one, but that's what we're going to have right there. So I'm going to go in here, and I'm going to go ahead in GitHub. Now that I've logged in, it knows who I am. I'm going to go ahead and start a project. So I click there. And I'm going to give this a alpha. I'm going to give it a name. Alpha Git demonstration is going to be the name of our repository. So think of it as a database there. Now, very interesting is that in this case, I have an option here. I can either make it public, which means anybody can see this, or private. And again, with GitHub, I think in this I can create public ones for free, but if I go to private, it's going to ask me for a few bucks a month to kind of control that. So just be careful. And the thing that's very, very important about this is that a public one, anybody can see that repository. With a private one, you're going to control who gets access it. So 99.9% of the time, you're going to be used private. But also, you may have a situation where you want to publish some code to share with the world, so you can use a public repository. And that allows people to then pull your files down and be available. So that's very important that you understand the distinction between the two of them, the ones you want to use. And I'm going to go ahead and initialize this with what's called a README file, which is standardized, which is just a text file that, excuse me, that you can put in README information about what's in the repository, what the versions are, and things along those lines. And there's some few other options, but that's all I'm doing. So I'm giving it a name. I'm going to make this one public, and then I'm going to initialize this repository from the README. And now I'm going to click this button, Create Repository. So in a moment, it's basically generating a repository up on GitHub that is ready to go, and at the same time, it's put that README file in there. So if I go back in here, I can look and I can see in this repository called Alpha Git Demonstration, I just have this one file called README, and that's all there is into it. But that's my first step there. Now I want to do the following. So now I've kind of set up my repository, and this is when you start from scratch. But what I'm going to do now is I'm going to go back to my local machine. The first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to go onto my onto mine, and I'm going to create a folder where I'm going to do two things. I'm going to clone the repository, but I'm also going to create a new project or a new alpha workspace in that area. So I'm going to go here and I'm going to create a new folder, and it's going to be called Alpha Git Demonstration on my local drive here. And you'll notice this is where I keep all of my different projects in here. And there's nothing in this at this point in time. So it's just kind of where on my local machine I'm going to put all my files and manage all my files locally. So that's all I need to do here. So now what I'm ready to do is I'm going to take the repository we created and I'm going to clone it down into my local environment. And it's going to do two things. It's going to create a local repository and then copy the information out of the master repository and bring it down. And then once I've got that, then everything's set up. I can just add more files here, sync them, and do that. And we'll go through that process as we go through the situation here. So the next step, again, is we've set up our repository. We're now going to use the source tree product to then create this repository on my local machine here and copy the information down. So now I'm going to jump over here. I'm going to go up here. I'm inside Git source tree. I'm going to say clone. And when I click clone, the idea of clone is I'm making a clone of my repository I've already created up on the server and bringing it down locally. So the first thing it's asking me for is where's the source? Where am I bringing that down? Well, that's what's up on GitHub. So if I go back into the web browser where GitHub is, I can just see there's a little button here called clone or download. And if I click there, you'll see that it shows me the web address of where that repository is at. And so I can copy that out. So I'll copy that to the clipboard. So now I have a pointer or a URL that tells me where that repository is located at, the one that's up on GitHub. Now I'm going to go here and I'm going to go and paste that. So now I've done that, and if I exit out there, you'll notice that, oh, it's already detected that this is a Git repository. Now you'll notice here, this is where it's going to clone to. And in my case, it just auto-defaulted into a certain directory. I think it's when I installed everything, it's set up from there. But what I want to be able to do is I want to clone this into the directory I just created. So all I need to do is go browse. I will browse to where I created that directory. And where is it? There it is, alpha git demonstration, and select that folder. So you'll notice now that all I've done is kind of said I'm going to take the stuff on the GitHub repository, and where I'm going to put it is in that empty folder down on my local machine. Now this is the name it's going to give me. It's sort of a bookmark name, and I'm going to keep the root folder local because that's where I want it to be. So now all I have to do is click clone. And in a moment, you'll see what it's done is it's calling, and it's so quick because there's not much up there. It has called the server. It has gotten the information about the repository. It's created a local repository on my local hard drive, and it's pulled down the files there. So you'll see this is now my interface. Now that I've created that, you'll see the name of the repository is up here. And what working copy is the current state of my files locally, any changed files or anything like that. And you'll see that in a moment. But if I were to click here on master, it shows me the complete history of this repository. So you can see that I am in sync with what's up on the server, and the only thing that's in there is that README file. And in fact, if I click on there, it shows me what that information is now. So let me go to the hard drive, and let's go in here, and you'll notice, hey, check it out. With my alpha git demonstration folder on my local drive, we now have a README file, because when it created this, it actually created this file, or the repository here. Now, what is a repository? Well, you'll notice that all we see in this environment right here is this one file called README, and I don't see anything else. Well, that's the trick. In here, and I'm going to go to Properties. Actually, I think it's Customize this folder. Yes. What I'm going to do here is I'm going to go, where is my settings? I want to show hidden files. Okay, so maybe it is, let's go Properties, Sharing Security, Previous, Customize. Maybe I got to go up here, View. I'm getting used to Windows 10. Ah, there it is, Hidden Files. Now check that out. When I turned on Hidden Files, guess what it did? Showed me, oh, I see, there's a hidden folder that was created inside that alpha git demonstration. So when I came in here and I did my clone, it did two things. One is that it created a hidden folder called .git, and in there it put a whole bunch of information, and this is how it's tracking all of my changes and stuff. So this is the repository, all this information in here. And then at the same time, it brought down the README file, and so that's now local on there. So that's just to let you know, is when it creates a repository is just a hidden folder on your hard drive. And in there, it has all the information about what it's tracking, the status, everything else. And so when Git works with it, it's just reading and writing these files and updating them from there. So I'm going to turn my hidden files off because I don't really need to see that anymore. Okay, so we've created our repository up on the server. We have created a local folder and created a repository in there. So now we're able to start adding files in here and have that go up, start working with those files. And the first step I can do that is I'm going to go into Alpha Anywhere. I'm going to click File, New Workspace. I'm going to navigate to that folder because that's where I want to put it in there. And I'm going to call this Alpha Git Demonstration. So basically all I'm doing is I've got an empty repository other than that README file, and I want to create a new project at that repository level. So I click and click Save. And in a moment, I have basically a new project. You'll see that in that folder, it's created all of my different little files and everything else. And so I can just start working the way I want to do it. So for instance, I'm going to go in here. I'm going to create a web component, and I'm going to click New. And I'm going to click UX, which is our form component. And I'm just going to go ahead and go to these controls, and I'm going to put a, let's put a text there, they'll go hello, and we'll go ahead and save this as demo_UX. So everything I'm doing now, you just do the same. You just work with Alpha the way you work with it. Now, what's going on behind the scenes is that you're creating files and new things in here. And also what's going on is that Git is watching this folder and observing what has changed. So you'll notice I had that README file in from the original when I created it, but all this new content has been created. So now I can go into here, and if I go to working copy, you're going to see that this is going to look a little differently. So we'll see right here that it is now tracking all of this information in here, and it's so it's looked at that folder and said, hey, I know the README files in there, but now you have all these other files in there. And this is called the staging area. Basically, it's saying these are the things that I have noticed that are different from what was there before. So now I can take the steps of checking that into my repository locally. But I can do some other things too, and we're going to be sending out, and actually Sarah has been working with us and we have a standard, but one of the key things you're going to learn about is that with Alpha, we generate not only the core files, like for instance the A5W component, but we also create and add some other kind of files. We make backups in the background, we create this little manifest file and things like that. And it's up to you, and it's how you want to manage it. But the reality is the only thing that's really valuable other than the top-level project is this demo_UX. That's the component. And you'll notice that, hey, since we save things in JSON, here is the JSON inside that file that defines that component. What you can do with Git, which is kind of nice, is that if you only want to track certain types of files, you can create what's called a Git Ignore. So let me walk you through that real quick. Let's say, for instance, I don't want to really use these manifest files because it's really not valuable. Alpha will automatically generate those whenever they're used, so their stuff. And I don't also want to track the backup stuff because that's kind of for my local development. I don't need to be syncing all that because those can get pretty big over time. So what you can do is in this case, source tree, I can click on, say, this file that I want to ignore. I can right-click on it, and there's a command in here called ignore. There's other ones like add, remove, etc. But for now, let's just say ignore. Now, when I do that, it gives me a question. It says, do you want to ignore the exact file name, ignore all files with this extension, or ignore everything beneath a certain web directory, or do something custom? Well, in my case, I not only wanted to ignore this one file, but anything that has a ._A5WCMP_manifest. Because I just don't want to worry about manifests. And so the nice thing is once I've marked this, if I create a new component and it creates a new manifest, it says, oh, that's the extension. I'm going to ignore that. So I click OK. Now, when I do that, it does two things. One is you'll see that it's no longer shown in my list here because it's been hidden. It's been ignored. But also, it's created what's called a Git Ignore file, which is where it has that list of the things I'm ignoring. So in this case, star._A5WCMP_manifest. And so I also want to go here and say, this component type catch, that's just kind of a local thing. So I'm going to actually ignore that file one. And then for the backup directory, I'm going to go ahead and ignore that. But what I'm going to do here is I'm going to ignore everything under the backup directory because I just don't need to track anything in that backup directory in my repository. Cool. So now you'll notice I have a much cleaner situation. And my Git Ignore, I'm just adding these pieces here. Now, Alpha is creating a standard one, and we'll, if Sarah hasn't put a link in there, it's on our website or our documentation website to help you get kickstarted there so you don't have to go through this manually. You just have to add a Git Ignore file into your directory, and then Git will look at that when it looks to do that. Okay.
In fact, if I could just interrupt you for one moment, Sarah has, in fact, posted into the chat window a list of the recommended files, and actually a link to the documentation which has the list of recommended files. So go ahead and grab that there.
Absolutely. Real quick, kind of just foreshadowing, you'll notice that I am checking in everything in my directory, including the workspace and other stuff. I'm going to come back later. In certain situations, you may only want to do your web project, but I'll come back and talk about that in a few moments. So you'll notice that I've got my Git Ignore file, everything good to go. Now, As I mentioned before, Git is watching that directory, and it said, oh, here are my unstaged files, meaning things that I've detected. What do you want to do with it? Well, if I'm going to go ahead and click Stage All. So I said, yes, I want all of these items to be in my repository and be tracked going forward. And so you'll notice that I'm in my Staged Files area. It has a bunch of files, and it has a little plus button that says it's going to be added to my repository because they don't exist before. And if I go, oh, you know what? I didn't want to do all those. I can put it back in here, and I can go back and forth. And I can also just pick a couple and say, I just want to stage that one. So I'm not ready to check in this other stuff. I just want to check in one of these files. So it allows you to kind of have that fine-tuned control over what you're going to check in. Now, what I'm going to do next is the following. So now I've staged those files, saying these are the files I want to check into my repository. Now, as I mentioned here, there's actually two repositories. There's the remote one, which is the initial thing I set up, and then there's a local one that I created here. Now, what I want to do is there's a way when you check things into one repository, it'll do both at the same time. But what I'm going to do is first, I'm going to take my files that I've changed and check them into here, and then I'm going to take those files and push them up to this repository here. So let's go ahead and go back in here. And so what I'm going to do is here are my files that are ready to be put into the into my local repository. I'm going to go down here and I'm going to say initial project complete creation and check-in. So what this is a comment. What we're going to do is what's called a commit. And a commit is taking these files and putting them into source control for control, meaning that now they're in source control. Git's going to manage them, watch them, and check and make sure everything's okay. So when you do a commit, you put in a comment so you can say, well, why am I checking these files in? Why am I putting them in there? And what you'll see is as you get more experience, if you're working on a team, you may want to put in here like ticket IDs for if you're tracking bugs and other things like that. You might want to put more information in here that's more extensive so people know, oh, this is for a new feature that's being added to my project and the pieces here. Now you'll notice over here that there's a little button. It says push changes immediately to origin master. What that means is that when I check it in, when I click commit here to check it in, it's going to, I keep jumping back, push it in here. And if I have that little checkbox, it's going to then automatically try to push it up to this right here. So I'm going to do a 1-2 step. Instead of doing them all at the same time, I'm just going to do a local check-in. So select to stage my items, put in my description, and I'm going to click commit. And in a moment, you'll see it's very fast. And now I have committed and checked those files into this repository right here. So I can go ahead and keep working on this. I can do more. It's all good. And you'll notice that the working copy now is empty because there's no changed files. Now I'm going to go to master. And this shows me my history. So this is very interesting. So you'll see right now that this is currently the origin master. And only thing in there is that README file. Then you'll notice here that I've got a local, which has all these files. So notice it's showing me my files that I added. It's also showing my description here. And I can click on these files and it shows me a preview of them right there. So you'll notice in this graph that I'm out of sync, meaning that I'm still not in sync with the origin master. Currently, I've got everything checked in locally, but I haven't updated that master one. And in fact, you'll see that in two areas. One, you'll see that origin master is here, not here. You'll see that this is my local master, but not the origin. But also you'll notice up here there's a little icon. It's called push. And on there it's got a little 1. So what that's telling me is that I've got one local commitment that needs to be pushed up to the remote to get me in sync with the remote. So I'm going to go ahead and click on my local one here. I'm going to go ahead and click push. And what it's going to do is it's asking me, okay, your local branch is master. We have a remote branch. We're not going to go to branches today. And are we good to go? Yes, do a push. And again, what's going to happen is it's going to take that commit that I did here and push it up here and sync it so that all of my changes are in the primary source control there. So I'm going to go ahead and click push. In a moment, it's calling the remote master. This takes a few more moments because it's doing all of its checks on everything. And in this case, everything has been completed successfully. And I click close. You'll see now two things. My little icon went away up here, the little note. Also, you'll notice that my master and origin master now are in sync. So I now have everything in sync. And in fact, if I go up to here and do a refresh, you'll notice, hey, check it out. Up on GitHub, we now have all of these files that I put in, including the Git Ignore and our project files. And also I can go down here, and here's all that information is in here. So the beauty of this is that it allows you to quickly, and in fact I can go into that folder and it's going to show me within that folder that's my demo UX from that standpoint there. So this is just a visual way of seeing that, and this is kind of where I am locally here. So now that's kind of all the setup. So I created my repository, created my local one, got to set up my project. Now I can just start working. So I'm in alpha, and I'm going to go in here and I'm going to change this. Hello, 123. Okay. And then I'm going to go save. Okay. So I can just keep doing it. I can add new files. I can do changes. I can do everything I want to do. And like, for instance, let's go in here and let's go to A5W and create a new A5W page. And I'll go, hello, class. And I'll save that as hello.a5w. And I can publish it locally, do all my testing, do everything else associated. Behind the scenes, when I go to my working copy, you'll notice that, kind of nice. Alpha is tracking all of that stuff. Like, for instance, it's got a little history file here, just showing what has changed. That's like a local one. I probably want to go ahead and ignore that. Oh, I didn't set it up before, so I'll keep it in there. But notice a couple other things. Notice it's telling me, okay, demo UX. Oh, look, it has been modified. And then I look at hello.a5w and go, oh, look, it's not tracked. So it knows files that have been modified versus files that are new, etc. If I click on there, you'll notice it's showing me my little file contents here. In fact, if I go to here and check this out, and this is kind of cool, and one of the neat things of going to JSON, it's actually showing me my diff between the original and the new one. And it's a bit complicated, but you'll notice that in the original file, this was hello, and in my new update, it's got hello 123. So I can actually visually see what are the differences. And so you'll see here, I've got like the changes actually to the user interface of changes I made. It's also got some things in terms of what it's generated down here, build count, etc. So it's doing a lot of different things behind the scenes, but you can quickly see what's changed within there. So now I'm going, okay, great, everything's good. I'm going to click Stage All, and I'm going to say I added a new web page, hello, and also modified the demo_UX with new text. And again, you can be as verbose as you want because this will give you a history of what's being changed and why these things are being checked in. Now, before I just click commit and it put it into my local repository but didn't put it up on the server. Now what I'm going to do is I'm going to say push changes immediately to origin master. That means I'm going to do a 1-2 punch. I'm going to check it in here and immediately sync it up with the up there. So let's go ahead and do that. So I'm going to click there and click I put in my text, I put push changes, I'm going to click commit, and in a moment, it's doing two things, and boom, 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 I'm done. So now my working copy is empty. You'll notice that my master now is all in sync. Basically, this was the previous check-in. Now here's my new check-in, and it has my title here. And you'll see that both my master and origin master are the same because I did them both at the same time. And if you come up here to Alpha Git demonstration and do a refresh here, you're going to see in here that now I have both my demo and my hello UX, and I see that history. And you can see all the code. You can see the history of it, what's going on, what's been changed, etc. There's a lot of nice things in here, knowing the 3 change files, etc. And so the cool thing about this is that you're going to be able to work just the way you do, and then using this graphical interface, just change your working copies. Now, let's say you're working with someone else. So someone else has cloned that repository. They've been making their changes over here, and they've been updating them and pushing them from there, from that standpoint here. So what will happen then is that when you sync, it's going to do 2 things. It's going to push your changes up and pull your change and pull any new changes down. And the other thing that's really powerful about that is that if you have a situation where there's conflicts, it's going to give you the opportunity to change it. So for instance, and I'll go back to my, let's see, alpha demo, let's go file status. Oh, nope, branches. Master. Go to my README. I wonder if I can edit it online. I'll have to see on that. Code. You'll see README. Okay, let's go ahead and edit that. And I'll go, here is my cool README. So I'm actually editing this. What I'm doing right now is I'm modifying it right here on the repository. Normally it would be someone else on a different machine pushing it in there, but just to demonstrate where it goes from there. So I've gone there, and I'm going to update this, updated for demonstration. And I'm going to go ahead and commit these changes on the server right into there. So you'll notice that I've gone ahead and my README now looks differently, and I've got a new commitment up there. So what we're going to find is we should be out of sync. And in fact, if I go here and I look at this and I do what's called a fetch, which says call the server and see if there are any changes. And again, that's called fetch. Pull actually tries to pull the changes down. If I click OK, what it's going to do is, check this out. Here's mine, but guess what is the master now? It's that the master, I'm out of sync with the master here. So therefore, it's telling me, someone checked in some files up on the server, but I haven't downloaded that from there. But if I want to make my local in sync with this, all I have to do is, as you'll see right here, click pull. So if I go on my local hard drive right here and I open up README, cancel. I'm going to open that up in Notepad++. You'll see that I have this alpha demonstration. It doesn't have that extra text that I gave there. So now I'm going to go into source tree and I'm going to go ahead and do a pull. That means please grab anything that's changed on the server and bring it down locally. So I'm going to say, and commit any of those changes right into my local repository. So I click OK. It's fetched that information. It's bringing some stuff. It's completed successfully. So boom, now I'm in sync. My master locally and the origin master are the same. I have the history of it right here. If I go in here and look at my README here, you'll see that now the file has that. So pretty cool. You don't have to send files to people and copy them into your directory. All of that is handled. And more importantly, it's tracking what's changed. So let's do something a little more interesting here. I'm going to, and this may blow up, so bear with me. I'm going to go to this README and I'm going to edit this. And I'm going to say conflict test. Okay? So I've changed my local version. And when I've done that, if I go into source tree and go to my file status working copy, you'll see that my README right here is different. Now what I'm going to do is go ahead and go back on here. I'm going to go to README. I'm going to edit that. And I'm going to go edited on server. Okay? And I'm going to go ahead and commit this server edit. So this is the situation where two people are working on it at the same time, and they're walking all over each other. So I'm going to go ahead and create a commit there. Okay. So now when I go back to my master, I can go, I've got some uncommitted changes here. And also, if I'm going to fetch, and you're going to see that I'm actually a little bit out of sync. For instance, you'll notice I've got red here because I've got uncommitted changes. It's detected that there's a file out of sync. So if I were to sit there and say, go ahead and I'm going to commit these changes here. Watch, I'm going to go ahead and do this. I'm going to go to my local, and I hope I'm not losing people, but the idea here is I've got to reconcile the fact that my file and the file up on the server are different. So I'll go my cool changes. And I'm going to go ahead and say commit, but it's not going to allow me to commit it because I'm out of sync. So what I can do is I can go ahead and say, you know what, I'm going to use theirs. So I'm just going to take this README file and copy it to the desktop. Okay. Now what I'm going to do is when I go to my working copy that's not there anymore, I'm going to go ahead and pull down what's on the server. Okay. Then what I can do is I can go back here, and you'll notice now I've got my there. Now I can go back in and copy my changes and say, okay, changed on local. So there's not really an auto merge capability, but it's going to give me a heads up on that. So now when I go back in here to source tree, and I can restage that and go ahead and do my cool commit it. It's going to go ahead and take, since I downloaded and then updated that float, I'm fully in sync. And when I go to the branches here, everything is, all the red's gone. I'm in sync there. So obviously, you need a strategy because you don't want to have to be going through that all the time. But there are situations where a couple people are working on the same thing at the same time. You don't want to write over. So, if someone's committed something in there, you don't want to write over their code changes without knowing what it is. So basically, source control is like a traffic cop saying, whoa there, I'm sorry, I cannot take your changes because when I do, you're going to overwrite what they already put in, and you're out of sync. So often it'll say pull down what they've changed, make your modifications, and then sync it up. And you'll get into a flow with other people. And often what you do is say, okay, you're responsible for working on these UXs. I'm on these pages. So you won't see that a whole lot if you manage your program correctly. But the beauty of this is that it's going to keep you honest, and more importantly, it's going to keep you from screwing stuff up. So if you and two other people are changing things and you overwrite each other, they could be like going off merrily and then all of a sudden realize, wait a minute, this isn't working the way I thought it. And the system handles it. And then there's another key capability called branching. And branching is really neat where right now you'll notice that I keep going up and back onto the same primary location. But if I'm going to create a new feature, I can create what's called a branch, which allows me to kind of have like a work area where I can be editing files, but still be able to work on that core set of files and not hurt them. And we'll go into that in a little more detail down the road. I'll show you an example of how you do that on another one of our episodes. But that is how you work with source control with Alpha. And again, I've done it with GitHub, Git, and SourceTree, but the same philosophies are for Subversion, GitLab, all these other pieces that are associated there. And as you can see, the nice thing is that these graphical user interfaces really make it visual, meaning otherwise I'd be seeing lists of files and I have to use command lines. It's buttons and visuals and other pieces there. Makes your life super, super easy compared to where it goes. And again, also, here's the thing. You're going to see a history of every commit and what went on. So if you ever have a situation where you go, you know what, I don't want to do it, there is a way to reverse those commits, bring them back out, and also kind of go back in time. So it's sort of like our backups, but it's much more sophisticated where you can then say, oh, you know what, I want to take out those commitments because I found a bug. So I'm going to roll it back so I don't screw everybody else up, do my edits, changes, tests, and then check it back into it. And we'll talk a lot more about what's called continuous integration and using these tools with Alpha. But I hope this gives you a lot more feel for how you can put this together. Now, there's one other thing I want to talk about. Currently, when I set this up, my repository is at the top level of my workspace, meaning that I'm tracking everything in my workspace. But the reality is most of the changes are actually in my web project area here. And so there's so you can either do your repository at the top level, but there are some advantages in terms of doing it at the web project level, especially if that's where 99% of your changes are at. One is that Alpha behind the scenes is changing stuff at the top level. There are more environmental variables that are local on your machine. So often, and I highly recommend looking at saying, okay, create the repository here so that all it's really doing is tracking these UXs, A5W pages, grids, etc. And then each person has their own project and they sync their web projects between them. So just something to consider, and it's a different way to approach it, but I find that often it kind of simplifies things a little bit because, again, all you're really doing in Alpha once you get going is spending your time in the web project control panel, creating reports, modules, classes, A5W pages, etc. So that's a more detailed introduction and input into there. We have some time here for some questions and follow-ups. So I'm going to turn it over to Dave and see if indeed we have some questions to ask or hopefully answer.
We do have some questions. So let's start with a question here which says, can you sync lots of files? For example, a folder with hundreds of files and subfolders. Is there some sort of limit?
Nope, none at all. The only limit you might have is that if you have two people that are making a ton of changes on those, you're going to have a lot of conflicts to resolve. But the system is, it's tracking everything. So it's like the all-seeing eye. So there's really no limitation. And in fact, if I go in here and create like subdirectories and everything else, it will automatically pick up those subdirectories and those files. Now you have to ask yourself, is it important for those files to be in source control? So there may be scenarios where there are files that are important to your project, but they don't really need to be in source control. So you have to decide that on a case-by-case basis. But you're not going to see any limitations. I mean, source control is used for massive systems such, as Google. I mean, any modern development team uses source control. And in fact, there's some really cool things you can do. What's getting more and more sophisticated is, you notice as I talked about it, let's say I made a change here, and let's say I got a bug report, and that bug report said, the README is out of sync. So I go, okay, great. I'm going to go in here, and I'm going to change this README and responding to a bug report. And let's say I'm using Jira or one of these modern ticket systems. What I can do is when I go in here, and you'll see if I go to my uncommitted changes, to my working copy, you can see here, I can say fixed bug report number 2345, whatever it happened to be, and I'm going to push that. And what it will do, which is really cool, if you get them set up properly, it will not only check it into source control, but it will actually go into that bug report and put the commit that it was done with and all the information. So more and more what you're seeing in the development and community is that they're connecting source control with ticket management and other things like that, so that developers, when they fix stuff, they don't have to go update 3 or 4 systems. They can actually use source control and say, and then you can sit there and say, comment, I fixed this thing. And then what will happen is that when you check it in, source control will go, okay, call that ticket system, find ticket 2345, and you've connected the systems behind the scenes and put in the comment there into that ticket and set the status to closed. And boom, now just by committing this, and I'm going to go ahead and stage that, when I commit here, it's not only committing it into my source control, but it's updating my ticket system with all the system, GitHub. Like in Atlassian, if you use Bitbucket, which are repositories by Atlassian, you can connect those repositories to a Jira instance, which is tracking the issues, and it will automatically communicate between the two to keep them in sync, saying, when you release a feature, it will tell you what commit inside source control all that was in. Things like that. Really cool stuff. And we're exploring more and more, finding good ones out there, but that's really the direction it's going, because developers are busy enough trying to manage things. They don't need to go into 5 systems just to do such updates. So they're finding ways to leverage source control, because the reality is source control is like the masterpiece, because once you've checked that in, if someone else builds it and publishes it to the server, it's got your stuff in it. You have a history. You have all the data behind it. So it's really that primary tool that people use on a day-to-day basis if you're a developer. And now what you can do is connect into these other pieces here and into these other systems and have the system work for you instead of making you do all the updates.
Terrific. Next up, and someone had mentioned that they had in the past run into an issue with only being able to load up 99 files or 99 folders, and they needed hundreds, but that should not be a limitation of GitHub. And
yeah.
I mean, I just tell you from first-hand experience, first of all, the Alpha Anywhere development team uses GitHub to manage Alpha Anywhere, which is many thousands of files and lots of people working on it simultaneously. And the other thing is that actually the entire Alpha Software website itself we decided to put into GitHub just in case we messed something up, and it actually turned out to be a pretty good system for keeping track of it. It's sort of a quick and easy CMS sort of system that worked for us. Couple of other questions. This one I'm not familiar with, but maybe you know what they're talking about.
Sure.
Just back up to it. The question is, if I keep my central repository on an enterprise server, is it true that I don't need GitHub?
Yes. Oh, that's a very good point.
Okay.
We have specified that I'm using a web provider for source control. These companies that do all that for you. But Git, and like for instance, Git is open source software. So the Git server is available and you can install on your own machine and create your own super private repository setup. So you do not need to use a third party. I find that that's super fast and simple, and they take care of doing all the updates and everything else. Just simplicity is, especially if you're just getting your feet in wet. But there's no reason why you can't go ahead and get a machine, set up Git on that machine, and then connect to it from your local machine and do all that. So and it's open source. It's not charged. But you have your time and energy that needs to go in and set these things up.
Excellent. Okay, looking over some other questions about Git, and then a quick alpha question. First of all, does Git automatically increment a build number? And if not, how do I set that?
That's a really good question, and the answer is no. It does give a unique ID for each commit. So each commit has a unique ID that it tracks, and so this is this gobbledygook that is set up from that standpoint.
Good kind of thing, yeah.
Yeah, what you're going to need to do is, like I did with the README file, if I go here in the README file, you can change the version number right here and it'll show up in the commit. So there's really no automated way at this time to sort of have a auto build number within Alpha, because Alpha really doesn't build. We have a set of different files, but we don't compile it all into a system.
Compiled, right? Yep.
So we're kind of a different animal. And when you go to publish the server, like when I sit there and say, okay, I'm going to publish this, all it's doing is moving your local files up to the server. There's no real versioning kind of capability built into it from that standpoint. Now, that said, if you're using Alpha Cloud actually does automatically increment deployment numbers, and you can actually read that information using some Alpha Cloud cool little functions in Alpha. So if you're using Alpha Cloud, there's actually an auto, because how Alpha Cloud works is you push the files up and then it deploys them onto the web server to make them available. During that process, it archives all those files. So essentially every time you deploy, it's saving a copy of that and giving it a number, an incremental number. So Alpha Cloud will do that for you automatically, but as far as doing it yourself, there's really not a way other than maybe like having a README file and being able to modify that and do, putting that in here and having the discipline to do it.
Right, or as Sarah suggests here in the chat window, there are commit hooks from GitHub at least that you could use to fire off something that did that.
Very true.
For you. Maybe that would update a file and give it an increment the number in that file, and then you knew where you were, but so you could do it just based on commits.
Yeah, great question, though. We appreciate it.
Another question here, also from Sarah, and the question is, did you go over the file system dictionary and show people how to create that?
No, I didn't.
Oh, would you like to do that? Would you like Sarah to do that?
Oh, look, I was playing with stuff. Oh, that was when I was in Alpha. See, this is an example of a last selected profile. So remember, when I went up here and said publish, it remembered which is the profile there. And what it does, it writes that onto the file system here. So that's like, I don't really need to track that. So I'll just ignore that and say, okay. So that's the idea, is you're going to learn, and now Git Ignore needs to be. Now, the cool thing about Git Ignore is everybody else was there. So, sorry, I just wanted to show you what went on there. It's like, wait a minute, a file changed and I didn't touch anything. But, and that's why, again, all of that stuff is at the sort of this level right here. That's why I often just set up my repository where my files are. Even that's actually in this project here, but you'll just do less of that kind of management piece there. But no, I'm not sure what she's referring to. So
well, in that case,
yes, I am.
Sarah,
I can learn something too.
Going to bring you on board here. Hello, Sarah, are you there?
I am here. Can you hear me?
I can hear you. In fact, I'm going to go ahead and make you the presenter.
Ooh.
Oh, cool.
Now, look at that. Stand back, Dion. All right, here we go.
Oh, my gosh. I don't remember how to do this. Am I already presenting?
No, you have to go to View menu, and then say Show Machine or Application or whatever you'd like to show.
Oh, no. You guys are in Macs. My screen? Oh, no. I used to know how to do this.
You mean we have a real operating system we work on a daily basis?
Oh, my goodness.
Oh.
Hey, we work on both of them.
Burn. a mark.
You know what? I'm going to click this giant button to see if
There you go.
There we go.
There we go.
There's your screen. All right, fantastic.
All right. This is really important for people who have built scripts or functions using the control panel in
yes.
Alpha Anywhere. So you have the web projects control panel, which we are almost always in. But if you have stuff on the control panel, you can actually create XBasic functions here. And it used to be the only way you could create XBasic functions in your apps until we added the XBasic modules and functions on the web projects. But what you want to do if you're going to be using GitHub with your Alpha Anywhere projects is to convert your Alpha Anywhere workspace to use a file system dictionary. And what this does is it in its initial state, all of your connection strings, scripts you've defined here, and beyond that are stored in one file, the ADB file with the workspace. And that means if you want to save your scripts to GitHub, you also have to save all of your connection strings and passwords and things that you may not want to be in there. So what you want to do is just convert it to a file system dictionary. And what that does is it creates a bunch of files in this directory called workspace name.a5lib. And once you've created that, you can actually pick and choose what you want to include. And in that link I sent to everybody, we recommend that you ignore anything with this .a5 settings extension. That's going to include like connection strings and that kind of stuff. So you can optionally include those if you're not worried about people having that information. But just be very, very aware that if you haven't converted to a file system library, that all that information is clumped into one file, and that would be this this ADB file here that you see in the top level web root or workspace. So that's what the file system is, and it was added so that if you were working with GitHub, you could say, I just want to check in my scripts, but leave all this other stuff out.
Yeah, and that's why now with the XBasic modules and classes, if you've got code, that's where it needs to go. But again, I still have little test scripts that I have in my control panel that I want to be able to access. That will exercise those modules and other things without having to create a actual web page or anything like that. So.
Yeah. So and just so you know, I have updated. This is really important. So I did update that article I sent out to everyone to tell you how to do that again in case you forgot. So it's just very critical.
Thank you, Sarah. That's great.
You're
I
welcome.
really appreciate that.
Yeah.
Oh, I'm the presenter again. Go here to there. Getting used to it. Okay. There we go. Share my screen. So that kind of wraps up. Any other questions regarding the source control stuff we've covered today?
I believe that wraps it up. Yeah.
Great.
Thanks.
Yeah. But look at it. Spend some time on it. If there's more than one person on it, this is going to be a huge boon to your productivity. Even if you're a single developer, having source control, it's really a good discipline because it archives your code offline or off your local machine. So if your machine crapped out, you would have a copy of everything up on the repository. You could always for disaster recovery. So there's some nice little benefits there. And there's just a discipline associated with using source control. And especially when you say, okay, one super nice thing is that you commit everything in and then you say, okay, this is my version 1.0. And then you may have like other versions that come after it. If you ever needed to go back and get that version 1.0, you can literally go back in time and get that whole version 1.0 out and literally have that project on your desktop just there and be able to work with it, do what you want to need to do it. So there's some really nice disaster recovery capabilities by using these tools and using the discipline of these tools. And as you start moving into multi-user development, it's the only way to go. And it works really effectively and helps keep everybody on tap. And you can see the history. And I really enjoy doing. Once you kind of get over the initial training kind of hump, you're really going to enjoy that.
That is terrific. Thank you very much for presenting. Thank you very much, Sarah. And thank you, everyone who attended and asked questions. If we didn't get to your question or other ones pop up during the week, feel free to send them to guides, GUIDES, at alphasoftware.com. And we will see you next week. A copy of today's recording should be available in a couple of days, both at YouTube and at Vidler. And we also have a brand new video library site. We'll be sharing the link with you for that quite soon, but it is up and running at a secret URL. Again, we'll let you know about that in a day or two. Thanks again, and hope to see you next week. Take care, and goodbye.